Hello, hi music technologists. I hope that you are doing well and you had a lovely break over Christmas and New Year and that you're ready to continue with your studies despite it being remote at the minute. What I'd like to do today is to give you a lesson based on our understanding music features, technology features that would come up in a question paper. So, our learning intentions today are to devise different styles, processes, controls, and effects. We're going to learn about different higher technological terms, and then using your knowledge you've learned, we're going to complete an exam-style question using these new concepts. So, by the end of the lesson, we should be able to say that you can differentiate between different styles and effects and processes. You can identify new technological terms, 4 of them actually, and you can apply your knowledge and take an exam style question, and I actually have 2 of them planned for you. Okay, to start us off, what I'd like us to do is we are going to listen to a number of excerpts or videos, and I'd like you to answer the questions for me as some sort of revision. If you can answer all these questions and write them down for me, and it'll be the same for the questions at the end, and then you'll send me them and I'll mark them and provide feedback for you. So, in this first question, I ask you to listen to the excerpt and identify the genre or style, and then you have to give 2 reasons for your answer, one referring to a music feature and the other to a technological feature. So identifying the genre style and then giving a music feature and a tech feature that would go along with the style or genre. So let's have a listen to this first example.
When your baby leaves you all alone and nobody calls you on the phone, don't you feel like a crying? Don't you feel like crying? Well, here I am, honey. Come on, you cry to me. When you're all alone in your lonely room, and there's nothing but the smell of her perfume. Don't you feel like a crying? Don't you feel like crying? Don't you feel like a cry? Come on, cry to me.
Okay, moving on to question 2. If you do need more time, you can just pause the video or rewind to listen to that example again. So, question 2. Watch the following video and identify the 2 controls that the player is using on the MIDI keyboard. So there'll be 2 controls on the left-hand side that they're using. I would like you to watch the video and identify what they are. So here is question 2. Okay, so moving on to question 3. What I'm asking you to do is to study the following EQ graph. Which type of EQ that allows you to pinpoint specific frequencies is displayed here. So looking at the graph and seeing that you can pinpoint specific frequencies, there's a type of EQ that we have that allows you to do so. And I'd like you to identify that for me, please. Okay, moving on now. Question 4. Listen to this excerpt and identify the prominent process added to the vocal track.
I be rocking in beats. Yup, yup. I be rocking in beats. Yup, 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 yup. Ha, ha, ha. Here we go. Satellite radio, y'all get hit with the boom, boom. Beat so big, I'm sipping on.
That excerpt was quite short, so I'll play it twice. Here it is for the second time.
I be rocking in beats. Yup, yup. I be rocking in beats. Yup, 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 yup. Ha, ha, ha. Here we go. Satellite radio, y'all get hit with the boom, boom. Beat so big, I'm sipping on.
Question 5. Listen to this excerpt and identify the effect added to the electric guitar. You'll hear this dry and then wet with the effect added. Again, I'll play the excerpt twice as it is quite short. Here it is for the first time. Here is the excerpt for the second time. So moving on to question 6, I would like you to listen to this excerpt played on a MIDI keyboard and identify the control or effect added. The excerpt is short and we played twice. So here it is for the first time you're listening to this excerpt and identifying the control or effect added to the MIDI keyboard. And here it is for the second time. Question 7. Listen to this excerpt and identify the genre style, giving 2 reasons for your answer, one referring to music feature and the other to a technological feature. So similar to question 1, so have a listen and identify the genre and style, and then back your answer up by giving 1 musical feature and 1 technological feature. Here is the music. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next part of the lesson where we're going to look at our technological terms. If you do need to hear any of those examples again, then just rewind the video to hear the music again before writing your final answers. So moving on to learning about our 4 new technological features, the first of which is going to be ambience. So ambience is best described as something that's similar to a room's acoustic, although generally the term only refers to small spaces. Ambience is the acoustic sound generated by a room with the judicious use of microphone techniques The ambience of a room in which an instrument is being recorded can be picked up and added to the direct sound of the instrument. This gives a greater sense of space within the recorded sound and can be led to a very natural sounding stereo image. So I've got a couple of pictures for you, and I want you to have a think from the two pictures how the ambience would sound different, so the natural kind of space of the room. So here's the first picture. Say for example, we're recording a singer, how is that going to sound in that room? And then the second picture, how is that going to sound and how is that different? So you can tell that in the first image it's in a much bigger space, so there's going to be much more of a kind of natural ambience with that room's acoustic, whereas in the second image it will be much smaller size of a room, so it will have less of the room's natural acoustic, or there would be less I suppose acoustic for the sound to bounce off of. So where this is going to appear in your paper would be in the stereo making technique question. So in the SQ marking scheme, our reason for selecting different stereo making techniques and how you justify your answer could be that through your choices, it should ensure good stereo separation and a good balance of direct sound and room ambience. So there's that word down there. So depending on what instrument you're recording and what space has been recorded in a live setting, then you might want to include the fact that by doing so, you'll be able to capture the room ambience. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to learn this statement, as it's straight from the SQ marking scheme, and it's always a good way to explain yourself and justify yourself in that stereo making technique question. So just to clarify again, room ambience is very similar to the acoustic, and it's to do with how the microphone and your microphone choices and techniques capture a very natural sounding stereo image from the space. So if you were recording it in that top image, obviously a much bigger space, so this is going to sound different from when you record it in that ambience compared to the second image down the bottom there, where it's in a very small space, in a very closed space. Okay, so moving on to our next concept, and this is clipping. Now you should have heard of this phrase before. And clipping is when a threshold level has been passed. In digital recording, any signal above 0 decibels threshold will cause clipping. It can be severe and potentially damaging form of distortion that happens when a signal is too high for the piece of equipment it's being fed into. This can be particularly damaging to loudspeakers. Manufacturers include many safeguards to avoid clipping in their equipment. It's very important to monitor meters and input lights. Flashing in red is never a good sign. So let's have a look at some digital audio workstations and mixer controls, so you can see what obviously clipping would look like, as it's come up before in the SQA paper, where it's given you an image and obviously played you the recording as well, and it's asked you to identify what's wrong. So this would be clipping. As you can see by in that top picture, it's all far too loud, it's all red, and in the bottom one you can see in the signal through that channel that it's into the red as well. So that would be clipping, and if this was to be played through your loudspeakers, then it could be potentially damaging and could break them. So some solutions to clipping that we can have are to reduce the gain. So that would be a very simple way, just turning down the gain so there's less input and less sound put through the microphone, which would obviously then help being the sound. It would then help the sound be reduced when it's put through the loudspeakers. You could also reposition the microphone further away from the sound source. You could apply a limiter, and only by setting that limiter, you're only letting certain sound frequencies or thresholds or a certain level of sound, if it's going to be too loud, through the speakers. So you can set that limiter so it doesn't let anything above a certain limit be played through the speakers. And that kind of ties in hand by setting your threshold so that nothing above that certain level can be put through. Okay, so moving on to our next concept is file compression. Now, this is something that I recently have a lot of experience with, especially when creating this video, as this video is far too large when I go to upload it onto Show My Homework or onto Teams. So I have to file compress it down so that it's smaller and more manageable. So file compression is the conversion of a larger file such as a WAV or MP3 file, or it could be a video file, for example, allowing a greater capacity for numbers of files to be stored. Smaller files allow easier transfer over networks and the internet. Compressing an audio file does, however, cause a loss in audio quality. Obviously, if you have put your recording into your digital audio workstation, you've worked on it, and then you mix it down, but the file size is far too large, you can't put it on anywhere, you can't send it to anyone, so you will have to compress it. But what you might experience is that the quality of the recording is less. So, another way this could come up in your SQA paper is in the fault and solution question. So, by making the file size smaller, then what could happen is, because you've made it into an MP3 file, is it's converted at a wrong sample rate. And the solution would be convert it again at a higher sample rate, which would give you a better quality recording. So because the file has been compressed, you'd reduce the quality. In order to fix that, you would convert the file again, but this time at a higher sample rate. So that is one of your fault and solution questions in your exam. Okay, just moving on to our last concept then, which is going to be velocity. So velocity is to do with MIDI, and it's a MIDI parameter which registers the force in which a MIDI input device, such as a keyboard, plays a note. The information is registered and can be edited and adjusted. The velocity of notes can be used to deliver a more expressive performance. So what this is basically how hard you're going to hit the key, and does that register through the MIDI keyboard. So if you were to play lightly or more forcefully, you can alter that when you edit your velocity. So they've got a wee quick video for you to watch, and it kind of explains how you can change velocity, and also lets you hear by changing the setting what happens. So let's have a wee watch at this video.
Hi, we are Tobias and Max, and together we are Sebastian.
We play electronic music live without laptop, only with our instrument setup.
The velocity amp modifier pipe helps you gain control over MIDI velocity.
Cheaper MIDI controller often have less sensitive velocity control. And that makes it very hard to play a pattern properly. Now, using the MIDI hub's velocity amplifier to control the Nord lead sound engine, even the cheap MIDI controller can be played with a very nice and precise velocity curve.
So velocity is to do with how, I suppose, forcefully you play the MIDI keyboard, for example, and you can edit it. So if you do press it forcefully, but you would like a quieter sound, then you could alter the velocity so that it would change that, or vice versa. If you played it quietly and you want it to come across more forcefully, you can alter the velocity. So what I'd like to do now is to put our knowledge into practice. I've also got a number of questions that involve other concepts we've talked about previously, but hopefully you'll be able to answer them. So let's look at a couple of past papers. So this is question 3 from the 2017 Higher Music Technology paper. In this question, you're asked to identify different recording faults and how you're going to solve it through a solution. So in the first example, it's a recording of an audiobook, and you're going to hear something that's wrong with it and give a solution how you'd fix the problem. And the second one is to do with a song which was converted to an MP3 format. So what I'll do is I will play this through and let it run before we move on to part C of question 3. So here is question 3 from the 2017 past paper.
Question 3. In this question, you will hear 2 recordings. For each one, you must identify the fault in the recording and describe an appropriate solution. A. Listen to this recording of an audiobook. Identify the fault and describe in detail how to correct it. You will hear this excerpt twice. Here is the excerpt for the first time.
On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson had met this moving mass 5 miles off the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank when 2 columns of water, projected by the inexplicable object, shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year in the Pacific Ocean by the Columbus.
Here is the excerpt for the second time.
On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson had met this moving mass 5 miles off the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank when 2 columns of water, projected by the inexplicable object, shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year in the Pacific Ocean by the Columbus.
You now have 1 minute to complete your answer. B. Listen to a song which has been converted to MP3 format. Identify the fault and describe in detail how to correct it. You will hear this excerpt twice. Here is the excerpt for the first time.
I didn't want to be the one to forget. I thought of everything I never regret. A little time with you is all that I get. That's all I need because it's all we can take. You used me once, you fled, looking it was dark. You made an offer for it, then you ran off. I got a picture of us kids in my head, and all I hear is the last thing that you said.
Here is the excerpt for the second time.
I didn't want to be the one to forget. I thought of everything I never regret. A little time with you is all that I get. That's all I need because it's all we can take. You used me once, you fled, looking it was dark. You made an offer for it, then you ran off. I got a picture of us kids in my head, and all I hear is the last thing that you said.
You now have 1 minute to complete your answer.
Okay, I thought there was a part C to that question, but it's actually this question which has a part C. So now what I'd like to do is look at the 2014 specimen paper, question 5, which looks at different styles of music, music features, microphone recording techniques, as well as articulation markings. So just to remember, for part C actually, articulation markings are staccato, our phrase marks, and our accents. So you're picking between one of those. For part B, we're looking at miking techniques. So your type of mic, polar pattern. You're also looking at the distance, as well as where you're going to position the microphone, and then justifying your answer. So let's have we go at the 2014 specimen paper, question 5.
Question 5. This question features 3 excerpts of music from the same genre. A. Listen to this excerpt and identify 2 terms from the list below which describe what you hear. The excerpt will be played twice. Here is the music for the first time. Here is the music for the second time. B. Listen to this excerpt of a saxophone quartet and describe in detail a stereo miking technique you would use to achieve a similar recording. Justify your choice.
Okay, so moving on to part C. In this question, you're asked to listen to this excerpt and follow the baritone saxophone part and identify the articulation mark that's been missing from the music. So here you go.
C. Listen to this excerpt and follow the baritone saxophone part printed below. Do not attempt to write during this first playing. There are articulation marks missing from the printed music. You will hear the excerpt a further twice, and you should name a type of articulation mark which is missing from the printed music. Here is the music for the first time. Here is the music for the second time.
Okay, so that concludes today's lesson. What I'd like to do is if you can submit your answers from the starter as well as the past papers to me through Show My Homework by Friday the 15th of January at 10:30, which is the end of our normal lesson. I will be available to help you during normal class time, which is obviously 8:50 to 10:30 on Friday during our leisure period that we have. And obviously, if you do have any issues before then you can message me on Teams or you can email me. I will always be available if you do need me. But specifically for this lesson, I'll be available during class time on Friday the 15th. I hope that you keep safe and I hope that we are back in school sooner rather than later. But until then, please do keep safe and I will see you next week for another lesson.